My name is Gene Freilich, and I would like to discuss with you a little bit about local history. It's a very exciting subject to talk about, so let's get started. I live here near the bustling metropolis of Shawano, Wisconsin, and it has a very rich history. First off, why should we talk about local history? Why is it important? I am so glad you asked. Every town has a wonderful story to tell, and it is a very wonderful experience seeing how a community started and how the changes over time have affected the area. The name Shawano comes from the Menominee Indian tribe, and the name means lake to the south. Shawano County has 25 townships, and many have played a very important role in the development of this area.
Okay.
Historians say that Jean Nicolet, a Frenchman, was the first white man to come to this part of the country. In 1834, Samuel Farnsworth is credited alongside Nicolet for discovering Shawano by paddling up the Wolf River. Shortly thereafter, Charles Westcott and Farnsworth set up a sawmill where the channel meets the Wolf River. The first settlers of Shawano came here because of the vast forest of pine trees and the potential business that forests offer to the immigrants. Hence, the logging era began, and many used this type of saw. To lumber off these magnificent pines, it was necessary to find a way to transport them to the Wolf River. The journal's logging notes in 1899 recorded the largest tree cut down contained 8 logs, 3 16 feet long, 4 14 feet long, and 1 12 feet long, and scaled just 4,200 feet. That is a monster tree. Transporting these logs required the use of horses and oxen, and sometimes they used sleighs for moving the logs to the Wolf River. Speaking of the Wolf River, it was the basic means of moving the logs down to Oshkosh, which was the major mill in town. Was the major mill town. In 1866, Kashina received $100,000 to make improvements to the river by deepening the channel, blasting rocks, closing up side cuts, and building dams and wing dams so the logs could flow freely down the river. The pine of the wolf was nearly gone by the 1890s, and the era of log driving came to a close. In 1884, Herman Neighbor worked extremely hard and was able to secure the first railroad. The St. Paul and Eastern Grand Trunk Railway was built from Oconto to Clintonville and ran through Gillett and Shawano. Later, this track was eliminated, and the Chicago and Northwest Railway served traffic east and west with travel connections to Green Bay. The railroad changed things significantly in Shawano. The mail came quicker, and more people began to live here. Many hotels and taverns got a start here. Other businesses included blacksmith shops, painters, livery stables, and harness shops. One very successful businessman was Charles Upham, who came to Shawano to set up a general store. In addition to this, he had a large hay barn, grain and potato elevators, coal shafts, men's clothing, and a hardware store. Of course, what is interesting about studying local history is finding out if any of your ancestors made an impact. Henry Klusterman was my great-grandfather's cousin and was born in Grand Duchy, Germany, and eventually made his way to the Shawano area. Due to an unfortunate accident in which his leg needed to be amputated, he looked into a different occupation. He kept a small saloon and a grocery store. He also served as Justice of the Peace for 3 years, then Register of Deeds for 4 years, Deputy Clerk for 2 years, and County Judge for 16 years, the longest term held by an incumbent in that office. He was also vice president of Shawano County Bank and dealt extensively in real estate, owning between 600 to 800 acres of timberland. Another family member was my grandfather's cousin, John Freilich, who was a business leader in the small town of Bonduel, Wisconsin, in the township of Heartland. Freilich was a veteran of World War I, and because of mustard gas poisoning, caused him to be stricken with a spinal illness that left him partially disabled. In 1923, he founded the Bonduel Service Garage, which was later named Chief Pontiac. In 1951, Freilich was recognized by Pontiac Motor Division as being one of the oldest Pontiac dealers in the nation, having been with Pontiac since its founding. He was also president of the village for 13 years, and during his term of office, the water and sewer facilities were built. This house that I am standing in front of was his primary residence and was later donated by one of his family members and has become the local archive for this area. My father, Keith Freilich, recalls spending many hours here as a young boy. Another family member who grew up in Washington Township was my grandfather's cousin, Adolf Maisch. He was born in 1893 and worked on the family farm. However, in his 20s, he decided to begin drinking, and as he said in his memoirs, became a hopeless drunk who was unable to work or eat. He wanted to die. And one day he said goodbye to his family and went for a long drive. Later on that evening, he decided to go back home and went to bed. Later that evening, he had a vision of Jesus standing on the stairs, looking at him with eyes full of love. Jesus did not say a word and was soon gone. The next morning, his cravings for alcohol was gone, and so were all the illnesses that go with it. He goes on to say that he lived the next 50 years and became interested in helping people, especially through the mission of the church. After several more years of farming, more land was rented, and he spent his time raising honeybees and became a member of the Shawano County Beekeeper Association. According to my father, he had over 10,000 hives throughout northern Wisconsin. He lived as a pauper, and as mentioned before, he was interested in missions. He used the monies to earn to support children overseas and also provided funds for local children to attend Camp Luther in Wisconsin. After he died, his will stipulated that the funds in his estate continue to be used to send these children to camp every summer. Another business that is part of Wisconsin is known for dairying. Many years ago, there were 1,700 cheese factories and 1,200 creameries in the state of Wisconsin. Today, there remains only 126 cheese factories and 46 creameries. Still, Wisconsin is well known for having some of the finest cheese in America. There are 9 cheese factories in Shawano County and 1 creamery that manufactures salted and unsalted butter. If you have never had cheese curds, you have not experienced real life. If you're familiar with the Green Bay Packers and see any fans in the stadiums, many of them are wearing the famous cheesehead hat. An event that occurred that was of major significance was the Great Peshtigo Fire in 1871. Reverend Peter Perrin was hunting pheasant in Sugarbush, close to Peshtigo. He and his guide got lost in the woods. So he fired off a shot to see if someone would hear. Meanwhile, tiny tongues of fire ran along the ground, burning the dry leaves. Because the land was dry and winds picked up, the fire grew in intensity. People were able to put out the small fires. On October 8, 1871, a cyclonic storm enabled the fires, and after 8 days had destroyed 1.5 million acres of land and killed approximately 2,500 lives. The fire went south, as far south as the township of Green Valley, which is in Shawano County. After the devastating fire, a man named John J. Hoff, who was a land agent and worked for the General Land Office in Milwaukee, donated many household items in the Green Valley area. The fire occurred at the same time as the Great Chicago Fire, so it was not publicized as much as the one in Chicago. Because of J.J. Hoff, my great-grandmother, Pauline Ernestine Tina Salzwell Freilich, purchased 80 acres of land in the township of Green Valley. And this land has been passed down from generation to generation, of which I am now the proud owner of. My grandfather, Adolf Freilich, purchased the last 40 acres of hardwoods for $800, and along with my father, Keith, made a road through the hardwoods. Thank you so much for joining me on this trip through some of the fascinating histories of Shawano County. It has been my extreme pleasure to bring you this presentation.